I was 39 when it all began, a seasoned financial analyst with a sharp eye for numbers and a life built around precision. People often remarked on my appearance: long chestnut hair, a face that turned heads, but I always valued my mind and professional competence far more than any reflection in the mirror. My father, Henry, was 82, a widower who had built his considerable fortune through decades of real estate investments. He had a trust in place to protect his legacy for my two children, Ellie and Ben, his only grandchildren. That trust arrangement was supposed to be straightforward, something we had reviewed together not too long ago. My mother had passed a few years earlier, and he had grown lonely in her absence, though he tried to keep up his optimistic spirit. He was my rock for as long as I could remember, a gentleman of calm strength, even as age slowly softened his once unshakable demeanor. Then came Layla. She arrived as a caregiver from an agency I had checked thoroughly, a woman in her late 50s with a wiry build and keen, watchful eyes. I initially assumed she was a godsend, someone who would give my father daily assistance and companionship while I juggled my full-time job and raised my kids. But almost from the start, I felt a twinge of discomfort I couldn't quite place. Lila's smile seemed just a bit too sweet, her questions too probing. Often she would linger when I visited on Sundays, listening to my conversations with Dad, interjecting small remarks that hinted at deeper curiosity. My job had trained me to spot subtle patterns, especially where money was concerned, so my suspicions grew when I found a half-hidden letter on Dad's kitchen counter referencing a revised trust with new beneficiaries. The vague references to charitable contributions made no sense to me. My father had always been generous in small ways, like occasional donations to the local library, but he had never talked about massive philanthropic changes to the trust that was meant for his grandchildren. I felt that familiar tightening around my eyes, the sensation that usually signaled an inconsistency in a financial spreadsheet. I said nothing to my father then, only politely greeted Lila before I left. Yet my mind was already whirring. That night, I could barely sleep. My father was meticulous. He never would have altered his trust without telling me, especially because he had granted me power of attorney after my mother died. Something felt deeply off, but I had nothing but a few suspicious details. Confronting Lila directly would tip my hand, and I wanted more evidence before making accusations. So I did what I had been trained to do as an analyst and set out to gather proof methodically. Within a week, I started installing discreet monitoring equipment in Dad's house. Tiny cameras, no bigger than buttons, and audio recorders that could slip unnoticed into corners of rooms or in decorative objects. I kept telling myself it was for his protection. He was getting older, had a heart condition, and needed careful supervision anyway. But a part of me knew I was preparing for a confrontation. On my Sunday visits, I placed the cameras in the living room where Dad and Lila often sat, near his desk where he kept important papers, and in the kitchen where Dad's medications were stored. There was no guilt, only a fierce determination to keep him safe. If my suspicions were unfounded, no harm done. If they weren't, I would have a record of whatever was going on. Every night, once my children were asleep, I would sit at my desk, headphones on, reviewing the footage. At first, there was nothing obviously incriminating. Lila chatting with Dad about the weather or what he wanted for dinner. Then, over the subsequent days, I began to notice how she would subtly steer conversations toward his trust, saying things like, "Your family is so busy, Henry. They don't really need all this, do they?" Or, "Wouldn't it be nice to help others who have no one?" Dad's responses came slowly, as if he were groggy or confused. He'd always been sharp, a man who never missed a beat. But now, he seemed to drift off mid-sentence and forget what he was saying. It was all so unlike him, and my fear intensified. I suspected medication tampering. His pill bottles were stacking up, and every time I visited, there seemed to be new ones I didn't recognize. Unable to stay silent, I went to see Dr. Ellis, my father's physician for the past 30 years. Dr. Ellis was a kindly man, nearing retirement himself, who had known our family intimately. In his cramped office filled with medical journals and pictures of his grandkids, I told him about the letter I'd found, Dad's strange confusion, and the new pills. His brow furrowed as he flipped through Dad's chart. He hadn't prescribed anything new. He agreed to run tests, quietly, during Dad's next routine checkup. Before I left, he placed a gentle hand on my arm and told me he would do his best to find out what was wrong. That reassurance gave me some comfort. At least I had an ally who would help me uncover whether Lila was secretly drugging Dad. Meanwhile, I dug deeper into Lila's background. I called a private investigator I knew, Karen, who had helped my firm on an embezzlement case. She uncovered that Lila had used multiple last names over the years and had been involved in a civil suit a decade ago for alleged manipulation of an elderly man's finances, though the case had never gone fully criminal. While it wasn't enough to prove wrongdoing, it was the most telling sign yet that my instincts were correct. Lila seemed to be a professional predator, targeting older individuals. I kept collecting camera footage and listening to Lila's phone calls. One evening, the audio recorder picked up a conversation that made my stomach turn. She was speaking to someone about diverting funds under the guise of charitable donations and finalizing some paperwork soon. The call was full of references to "he's practically a zombie these days" and "the charities are all set once he signs." It was clear she had a plan to siphon Dad's money into what were likely shell organizations, names that sounded vaguely philanthropic, but upon a quick online search, turned out to be bare-bones registrations with no real activity. I took notes, traced each alleged charity, and found addresses leading to a strip mall in another state, or, in one case, a vacant lot. She had woven a deceptive web, but she had no idea I was quietly unraveling it. Not long after, Lila called to invite me to a family meeting at Dad's house. She used an overly sweet tone that set my teeth on edge, telling me Dad had exciting news about his estate and was hoping I would come. I agreed immediately, carefully hiding the tremor in my voice. This was the moment I had been waiting for. She was about to make her move publicly, probably planning to have him sign the revised trust right in front of me. Part of me bristled with rage, but the strategist in me saw the opportunity. Let her lay out her false documents. Let her show her hand. I already had a binder packed with counter-evidence, the original trust, emails from real charities stating they had no record of any donations from my father, transcripts of her phone calls, Dr. Ellis's upcoming lab results, everything. I spent that week methodically organizing it all, numbering pages and adding date stamps. This wasn't about shouting or drama. It was about calmly dismantling her scheme when she least expected it. A few days later, as part of the plan, I took Dad to Dr. Ellis for his scheduled appointment so he could run the test to see if Dad had been given any unauthorized drugs. Dad seemed groggy when I picked him up, slurring some words as Lila lingered behind him, pretending to fuss with his jacket. I drove him to the clinic, asked him point blank if he remembered changing his trust. He said no. He had always intended the grandchildren to inherit everything, managed by me, until they reached adulthood. He looked so confused and small that I had to fight back tears. This was my father, the man who had taught me the value of independence and perseverance. Seeing him like this lit a fire in me. Whoever threatened his well-being would soon face the consequences. Dr. Ellis drew blood and promised to call me with the results in a few days. I thanked him and drove Dad home, feeling his eyes on me as if he were silently pleading for reassurance. That evening, after Dad was settled in, I returned to my own house, put my kids to bed, and spent hours reviewing everything I had on Lila. I wanted no loose ends. If she brought a notary and official paperwork to that family meeting, I would be ready to counter every lie with documented truth. Sure enough, on a Thursday night, Dr. Ellis called. Dad's system was loaded with benzodiazepines, far more than any normal prescription would allow. My heart pounded as the doctor explained that these sedatives could cause memory issues, confusion, and a weakened heart rate. Perfect for someone who wanted to keep him docile and pliable. I thanked him and hung up, tears of anger burning behind my eyes. Now I had lab confirmation. There was no doubt left. Saturday arrived, the day of Lila's so-called family meeting. I dressed carefully in a charcoal blazer and skirt, my hair pinned back so no one would question my seriousness. I drove to Dad's house, binder on the passenger seat, breathing slowly to steady myself. Tom, my brother-in-law, was there with his wife, Linda. A notary stood awkwardly by the window, holding a leather folder of documents. Dad sat in his armchair, looking frail, while Lila hovered beside him in a pressed blouse, wearing a smile that was too wide to be genuine. She started with a honeyed introduction, announcing that Henry wants to share some changes he's making to his estate, and pointing to the papers on the coffee table. She mentioned that he intended to donate large portions of his assets to help those in need, and that it was a wonderful opportunity for all of us to witness his generous heart. I glanced at Dad, who looked bewildered, but nodded politely. Lila tried to push the paperwork toward the notary, urging my father to sign. That was my cue. I stood, binder in hand, and said I had something to share before any signing took place. Lila's expression twitched, her eyes darting to the dark binder. Everyone in the room fell silent as I flipped it open and distributed copies of the original trust. I explained how this document, dated 5 years prior, named my 2 children as beneficiaries, with me as trustee. Then I revealed transcripts of Lila's phone calls, carefully highlighting the lines where she discussed diverting money to fake charities. Her face paled, but she attempted to keep her voice steady, insisting she was only following Henry's wishes. My father, confusion and fatigue clear in his features, shook his head feebly. When I asked him if he remembered changing the trust, he managed a quiet, "No, I didn't." I showed the emails from the real charities, explaining that none had any knowledge of his donations. Finally, I handed Tom the lab results showing unauthorized sedatives in Dad's bloodstream. Lila stammered, calling the evidence circumstantial, and declaring that I had no right to record her. I countered that, as Dad's power of attorney, I was well within legal bounds to install cameras for his protection. Then I confronted her directly. "It's over, Lila. You manipulated him, and you tried to steal his estate. This ends now." Tom picked up his phone, dialing the police while Lila's composure broke. She tried to leave, but the notary, suddenly anxious to distance himself from any wrongdoing, stood in her way. The police arrived quickly, took a cursory look at my evidence, and escorted Lila out in handcuffs. She shouted that it was all a misunderstanding, accusing me of lying, but her words fell flat. I stood by Dad's side, calming him as best I could. He seemed to grasp that something major had just happened, though the full weight of the betrayal would sink in later. In the weeks that followed, the investigation expanded. Officers discovered that Lila had already skimmed some of my father's funds, forging checks for tens of thousands of dollars, funneling them to accounts tied to her relatives. If the trust revision had gone through, she would have gained access to the bulk of his fortune. Thanks to the evidence I had gathered, and the timing of her unfiled paperwork, we were able to stop her before she got it all. She faced multiple felony charges, including financial elder abuse and forgery. Dad, meanwhile, began to recover once he was off the sedatives. His old spark gradually returned. At first, he insisted on staying in his own home, saying he'd lived there for decades and didn't want to leave his memories behind. But after an incident where he nearly left the stove on and risked a small kitchen fire, he agreed to come live with me. I cleared out my guest room and brought in some of his favorite pieces of furniture so he would feel more at home. Ellie and Ben were thrilled to have their grandfather around all the time. He told them stories about his earliest real estate ventures, how he started by purchasing a single duplex in his 20s, renting out one side while living in the other. The kids hung on his every word, proud of him, unaware of just how close we had come to losing him. My life shifted to accommodate this new reality. I juggled my demanding job, the kids' schedules, and caring for Dad, But there was also a sense of relief in knowing he was safe under my roof. Being a financial analyst had taught me discipline. I thrived on structure, and I set up a meticulous schedule for Dad's medications, appointments, and daily activities. With time, his mind cleared even more, confirming our worst suspicions about how heavily Lila had drugged him. I also sought legal counsel from Rachel Park, an aggressive elder law attorney. She helped me lock down the trust, file the necessary injunctions to nullify any fraudulent revisions, and begin the process of pressing charges. Between the transcripts, the lab results, the forged checks, and the entire fiasco captured on camera, our case was rock solid. Lila's background check indicated she had skirted similar charges in the past, but this time we had her cornered. While I went about this methodical legal battle, my children observed carefully. Ellie, 12 by then, asked me one night if everything was going to be okay. She had sensed the stress in the house and how consumed I was by scanning footage and comparing documents. I reassured her that we would protect Grandpa, that I had found all the proof I needed. She simply nodded, telling me she believed in me. That moment spurred me on more than anything. I wanted to be an example of calm determination for my children, showing them how to stand up for what's right without resorting to rage or panic. Eventually, Lila was formally charged. The judge denied her bail due to the weight of the evidence, and she awaited trial, looking at several years behind bars. The district attorney contacted me, thanking me for gathering such clear, organized material. During a preliminary hearing, Lila tried to claim my father had willingly changed his trust, but her argument collapsed when Dad, speaking with the lucidity he'd regained, stated under oath that he never signed any trust revisions of his own free will. Dr. Ellis testified about the high levels of unauthorized sedatives. It was open and shut. A year passed, and we adjusted to our new normal. Dad thrived in my home, doting on Ellie and Ben, sharing meals with us, and telling jokes that only occasionally fell flat when he grew too tired. My firm recognized my ability to handle a complex personal situation while still excelling at work. I closed a significant deal that netted us a major client, which led to a promotion. My name joined the letterhead. It felt surreal, but also a testament to how single-minded focus can yield positive outcomes in multiple areas of life. Tom and Linda checked in frequently, apologizing for not suspecting Lila sooner. They had found her warm and gracious at first, never imagining she could be a con artist. Looking back, I realized that a cunning manipulator like Lila relies on others' complacency. She likely saw an elderly widower with a loyal but busy daughter, a father whose health was declining just enough to exploit. She must have figured I was so consumed by my job and motherhood that I wouldn't notice subtle changes or would lack the energy to dig deeply into them. But she was wrong. The irony is that being a financial analyst, trained in ferreting out even the smallest discrepancies in balance sheets, made me the worst possible target for her scheme. The moment I saw the numbers didn't add up, I took action. 2 years later, I sat on my back porch with Dad one bright morning. He sipped his coffee and looked out at the yard where Ben kicked a soccer ball around. Ellie was inside, reading about architecture, her newest obsession. Dad breathed in the fresh air, smiling peacefully. The transformation from that groggy, confused man under Lila's thumb to this content grandfather was remarkable. I asked him if he ever thought about what happened, if he felt bitter. He paused, swirling his coffee. "It's scary, sweetheart," he said quietly. "Knowing someone can slip into your life so smoothly and twist your thoughts. But I try not to dwell on it. You saved me." That simple phrase, "You saved me," nearly brought tears to my eyes. He had always been the one looking out for me, from my earliest memories of him holding me steady on my first bike to helping me navigate my mother's passing. Now, in his most vulnerable moment, I had stepped up and returned the favor. We didn't talk much about Lila after that. Her trial concluded with a guilty verdict on multiple counts, including financial elder abuse. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with possible parole after serving a portion of that time. But by then, she was in her early 60s and would be monitored closely if released. Rachel Park confirmed we had recouped the stolen funds, which Lila had tried to hide in a jumble of fraudulent charities. The money never actually left Dad's broader investment accounts. It was all traceable, because none of the final paperwork had been filed in time. That fact alone made me smile. Her overconfidence had been her downfall. Ellie and Ben continued to flourish. Ellie ended up winning a small school competition where she designed a miniature model for a community library. Ben excelled at soccer, dribbling circles around his peers. Dad, proud grandfather that he was, never missed a chance to attend a match or admire Ellie's drawings. Sometimes I would leave them all in the living room, Dad recounting some story about his younger days, how he acquired his first commercial property by leveraging the equity of a small family home he had inherited. My children would listen with wide eyes, enthralled by his tales of deals, negotiations, and the real estate booms of past decades. It was an inheritance of knowledge far more valuable than the trust money itself. Gradually, the tension of that dark chapter faded. I replaced Dad's old security system with a more modern setup, partly to reassure him that no one could slip in unnoticed again. He and I revisited the trust documents, updating small details for clarity. He wanted to include a slight increase to local charities that he genuinely cared about. Nothing suspicious, just a thoughtful sum to the library and a community arts program in Mom's memory. It was meaningful to him, and I was happy to see him taking charge of his finances again. One evening, we held a modest gathering to celebrate Dad's 84th birthday in our backyard. The warm glow of string lights hung from the porch. A few of Dad's old friends came, along with Tom and Linda, and some of my close colleagues who had supported me through the ordeal. Dad cut a chocolate cake while everyone cheered. When it was time for a toast, he raised a glass of sparkling cider and, with a slight quiver in his voice, said that he wouldn't trade this family for the world. I caught his eye across the table, and we shared a look that said everything. We'd made it through the storm, together. Time moved on, and life felt quietly triumphant. That's the thing about true justice. It doesn't require gloating or needless shouting. Leela hadn't just failed to steal from us. She had made us stronger by reminding us how precious trust and vigilance are. I continued my career progression, eventually becoming a partner with more responsibilities. Dad remained a guiding presence for the children. Occasionally, I'd see news stories about other cases of elder abuse and feel a pang of sympathy for families who might not have had the resources or expertise to catch the culprit in time. It made me even more grateful that we were able to protect Dad when it mattered most. During a reflective night with a glass of wine in hand, I thought about how everything played out. My nature wasn't vengeful. I had never wanted to see Lila suffer. I only wanted to protect my father. That's why when people talk about revenge, as if it must be dramatic or furious, I shake my head. The best revenge really is success, moral success, personal success, and seeing the people you love thrive in the aftermath of someone else's wrongdoing. Our entire family was living proof of that. I had approached this crisis with the same calm, step-by-step mentality I brought to analyzing financial statements. I didn't need to shout or curse or threaten Lila. I just needed to gather the facts and present them methodically. And in the end, her own lies were enough to condemn her. I often recall the final chapter of that saga, the moment Lila was escorted out in handcuffs while Dad watched from his armchair. She had assumed an elderly man's daughter would be too busy or too naive to question her. She didn't realize she'd set foot in the home of someone who specialized in catching discrepancies and analyzing data. In her eyes, I was simply a pretty face, a busy mother who might ignore small anomalies. But she was wrong, and her arrogance cost her dearly. To this day, Dad still lives with me. We talk about buying a smaller property for him nearby, but the truth is, we've grown comfortable with each other's routines. He's found a renewed purpose in helping with the grandkids, occasionally cooking hearty meals or simply recounting family history at the dinner table. The kids couldn't be happier, and I've never taken a single day for granted. The memory of nearly losing our family trust, and more importantly, almost losing Dad's autonomy, keeps me vigilant. Even the simplest joys, like sharing morning coffee with him, feel like small celebrations of the life we almost had stolen. Sometimes friends ask if I regret not taking a more lenient approach to Lila, maybe letting her quietly resign and walk away without pressing charges. The question always catches me off guard. No, I don't regret it. Letting her go unpunished would have opened the door for her to victimize someone else's father or mother. Besides, I never sought vengeance for vengeance's sake. I sought accountability and protection. Justice isn't always about punishing evil. Sometimes it's about defending good, ensuring that a person's final years aren't tainted by deceit. Dad deserved better, and so do all elderly people who are targets of manipulative caregivers. I take satisfaction in knowing that Lila won't soon forget the day she miscalculated her mark. She thought she'd orchestrate a neat little con job, forging documents, doping Dad, and leaving our family none the wiser until it was too late. Yet she encountered me. And I don't say that with arrogance, but with gratitude. My background, my instincts, and yes, my stubborn protectiveness converged in just the right way to stop her. As time marches on, life feels normal and beautiful in all its small details. Ellie is on her way to high school now, delving deeper into design and architecture, with Dad often offering old maps or building sketches he's saved for decades. Ben is a full-fledged soccer fanatic, always asking Grandpa to watch his trick shots in the backyard. Dad, though slowed by age, remains mentally present and continues to regale us with stories, some we've heard 100 times, but we still listen because we know one day we'll miss his voice. The trust remains intact. The dream Dad had of leaving something substantial for his grandchildren is secure. That knowledge allows him to sleep well at night, free from the haze Lila once forced upon him. I suppose the biggest lesson is that real empowerment doesn't come from shouting down an enemy or succumbing to anger. It comes from a quiet, determined gathering of facts, a belief in justice, and an unwavering sense of responsibility for those we love. Lila never saw that coming, which is precisely why she lost. She underestimated my ability to calmly pick apart a scheme until there was nothing left but her blatant guilt. In the end, her plan crumbled under its own weight. Now, whenever I look at Dad, settled in our home, chuckling at the kids' antics, I'm reminded of what we almost lost. And every time that reminder tugs at me, I also feel the warmth of what we gained. A stronger bond, a deeper appreciation of each other, and the simple joy of an untainted legacy. I move forward without looking back at Lila or her manipulations. We are free, we are safe, and, in the quiet grace of day-to-day life, we have won.